Again, my name is Onyinchi, Ekumakama, and I will give you the topic shortly, but let's meet my guest. He is here. His name is Olumide Kayode Omosebi. He's a lawyer and the CEO of Gnosis Initiative. Good morning to you, Olumide.
Good morning.
How do you do?
I thank you, and you?
Very well, very well actually, thank God. Good to see you too. Last week was something, last week Saturday was something we showed. In fact, that inspired the conversation of today. I feel like Lumbi actually did say it on radio. He said, you know what, in fact we're going to discuss this next Saturday, in the heat of all the conversation that was going on. But before we get into today's discourse, I think we should do a little bit of recap as to what we looked at last weekend, last Saturday on the show. If you're wondering what that is, I'm going to give you a really brief recap of that and remind you of the topic. It was divorce, I believe. That was the conversation. Actually, no, that wasn't the conversation last week. I beg your pardon. It was silence. Silence was the conversation last weekend that triggered. Let's talk about today's topic, because the reason for silence, will I say, can be linked to the conversation we're going to be having today, which is titled Tradition and Culture. So, for some reason, society or societal constructs, and I put that in air quotes, some traditions, some cultures encourage silence, suffering in silence. You're literally dying and they're asking you to keep quiet instead of opening up your mouth, literally just speaking. I don't mean this in figuratively now, literally just speaking and seeking help to get yourself out of whatever situation it is that I'm currently in life. But let me allow my guest to do this what's on your minds here. What will be making a call today, so stay tuned for that.
Well, this month is the International Month of Awareness Against Domestic Violence and Abuse, and all what we have been discussing are things linked directly with domestic violence and abuse. So my thinking is why people stay in abusive relationships and marriages, and I found that there are 5 basic reasons why people remain in abusive marriages. Number 1 is religion. Number 2 is pregnancy and children. Some people get married because they got pregnant, and then some people stay in the marriage because of the children. You would hear it all the time, if not because of my children. So the number 1 reason is religion. Number 2, children. Number 3, culture and tradition. Number 4, public opinion, what will people say? And number 5, money, finances. So today I want to treat tradition and culture as one of the reasons why people stay in abusive marriages and relationships. In fact, we would quickly go with tradition, culture, and then discuss the children and pregnancy as well. So tradition and culture, this is for those of us that come from a particular area or state or belong to a certain tribe. That tradition dictates the way you celebrate and how you choose your partner. The word tradition is derived from the Latin word tradere, which means to transmit, to hand over, to pass on. So tradition basically means that there are ideas that are passed on from one generation to the other. If you get that, there are long-standing customs and practices handed down from one generation to another generation. So this tells you, therefore, that you cannot verify tradition, since it is always from what someone told somebody who told you, because the person that told you also heard from somebody. So tradition is always in third person, because it was told to you by someone who it was also told to. You cannot verify tradition, but tradition is there. Tradition basically are ideas of the founding fathers of a particular settlement. The first set of people who were in a community who gathered around and decided on practices, customs, culture, and tradition because, to suit the particular problem, the issues they had at that time. So from tradition, you have culture. Culture is the expression of tradition. Culture is tradition in picture, which is the knowledge of a particular group of people. Culture are the ideas, the social behavior, which covers how they dress, the language they speak, the kind of foods they eat. For example, when you are talking about the Yorubas, you see it from the way they dress. The Danshiki, you see them in Iro and Buba, Gele, that is their culture. So culture is the expression of tradition, the way they behave, the way they reason, the way they celebrate their birthdays, marriages, that is the expression of their culture. And culture is tradition in color. So tradition is an inherited pattern of thought. It is inherited. It is passed on from one generation to the other. Now, the problem is when tradition now interferes with your right to choose or the mood of your marriage, how you can choose, where tradition now is the problem as it imposes on your right to choose. This is where we now have a problem. Tradition and culture is a beautiful thing. It is meant to show the light and the hope of a particular community. But when tradition and culture begins to bring the negative side, which is it starts imposing on people, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, then there begins the problem. Because in some relationships and marriages, we have seen that the problem was not from the husband and the problem was not from the wife. The problem was the tradition of one of the spouses, where tradition now begins to infringe on your relationships, on your marriages. That is where we have a problem. Now, we need to stress what tradition is. Tradition was created by men from ages past who were the early settlers to compound or to solve issues that existed in their time. For example, 500 years ago, there was an epidemic, and then from that, they decided on a response to that problem, which became the tradition of that land. So now, here we now come 500 years later, that the tradition is still holding people down, and people cannot do this because of what happened 500 years ago. I will give you some examples of tradition. Number one, let me say the killing of twins. They did not understand. They saw it as, a baby came out and they were celebrating. Next thing, another baby came out and they are like, what's going on? Then a third baby came out. You have triplets. And they believed this was a curse from the gods. But now we know that it is under pressure. The embryo could split into more than one. But then they thought this was an aberration. This was abnormal. This must be an abomination, and they started killing them. So knowledge exposes the frailty of tradition. Then you have the female genital mutilation, where you think that because you cut off a particular part of a woman's genitals, it will stop infidelity. These were traditions that was the Osu caste, where a stronger community conquered another community and made them slaves, and labeled people there that they are slaves. And till today, you find out that what happened 500 years ago, there is no civil war, there is no conquest within Nigeria, there's no intertribal wars where one slave and slave trade has been abolished. But still, you have people, you cannot marry from there, they are Usu. This is my problem. How can the men that lived 500 years ago who made this rule still be governing the lives of people 500 years after? So it means, how can the dead still be speaking and dictating the lives of the living? How can the dead be speaking louder than those that are living? How can people that have died still be controlling the lives of people that are alive? Number one, knowledge has increased, that we know that those problems they had before can no longer stand in the world that we are today. So what it does is it brings you back to the problem that they had. They just take you from now, they take you from 2020 and take you to the year 1500, and the problem they had then, that's what they do. They just take you back in time and then give you an inherited problem that they had then, which is not a problem today. But you do not see it that way. You say, this is how it is done in my area, this is how it is done, this is how we do it, to the detriment of people's marriages, to the detriment of people's lives. Now, this is my problem. How is it, let me just break it down let me summarize it to this. How is it that the dead are still governing the lives of the living? How can dead people still be determining how you choose, where you marry from, where you don't marry from? This is giving you a tradition or a culture, or what will ensure your slavery. This is my problem. How you allow tradition to come in between your modern day relationship between a wife, a husband, or a husband's family, a wife's family, because of one tradition that was given by someone who did not know better 500 years ago. How can the dead be speaking louder than the living? I met a woman, she reached out to me. She's been separated from her husband for about 10 years. They've had no intercourse, but she says she cannot leave because if she enters another relationship, her children will start dying. I said, what do you mean? They said the custom of their place is if a woman sleeps with another man, then the first child or their children will start dying. You would run mad, you have to go to the village, they have to do something for you. So when she said all this, that the woman would do this, I said, okay, what will happen if the man cheats? Because it is if the woman does this. What about if the man sleeps with another? What will happen? She said, well, nothing will happen. But you see, the tradition, the culture there, it was obvious that it was set by men to subdue women. How can you tell me if the woman cheats? Nothing will happen to the woman, but then your tradition starts killing the children. What kind of tradition, what kind of culture will uphold and even annihilate the next generation for a sin of the previous generation? Who will subscribe to that? I met, during a lady came to me, she said she didn't know that this is how it would be. I didn't understand. She said after the marriage, they came to her, welcomed her into the new home, the old elders of that particular, and they said, there are some things in our family we don't do. They said, when she washes, the clothes must not stay overnight. She must pack them in the evening, that their clothes do not stay out overnight. Number two, they cannot have sex in the afternoon. It must be at night. Because in our family we are this. When she listed it to me, then I met another one who says if a man gives her money, she cannot collect, or she has to go home and tender the money to the husband, because if she doesn't, something might start happening. I'm like, what the hell is? So if like I see you and we enter the same cab and I pay for you, she has to tell that I just started hearing different cultures, and so people are trapped in it. You are there, you cannot leave a marriage, you have separated, but you cannot move on, because if you do, your children will start dying. Then I met another one who called me after the show we did it about a year ago, and said himself and his wife had a problem. They had 4 children, they separated. So years after, they met at a place, and then they greeted. One thing led to another. They started talking and blaming each other. You were the one that caused this. That one said no, it was. And after they found out that okay, they separated because of a misunderstanding. I thought you, and they now made amends and decided to come back together. Now they have 4 children. And on getting back together, the gentleman traveled to the village, and part of his agenda was to inform them that myself and my wife are back. And afterwards, when he mentioned it, the elder in their house said, in our place where we come from, when you separate, you cannot go back together.
No, wow.
That is our tradition. You don't look back.
Different places.
And the man said, what are you talking about? I'm the one that separated. It's not the community that separated now. I'm the one that said we had a fight, we separated for years, and now we have made up, we want to. And they said no, over their dead body, that he shouldn't try it. In fact, when he said that we're already staying together, that uncle came down to Lagos to check and said if they do not separate, all those consequences. And after some time, the man found out that he started having erectile problems. The uncle will come to check that you people are still together. It became a problem. And he reached out to me. The man said this woman has had 4 children.
Mm-hmm.
For me, they were both. I told him to put it on speaker so his wife was also there. Mm-hmm. And I said a prayer. These are traditions. These are traditions of men, and have no. What do you? I mean, how is it anybody's problem? Is it the problem of the ancestors?
Wickedness. I mean, wow. Instead of them to be happy, they've come back together. There's peace in this home now.
No. It is all tradition. And what is this tradition? It was the way people, the problems they had like 500 years ago. Even if they had issues 500 years ago, I'm sure within that time they would have sorted their issues. But they made it a law and started passing it down. You see, I have nothing against tradition and culture. Culture is the expression. It's even in the arts. When you see the bronze head in the Benin, and that is their culture. So it is a beautiful thing. But when culture and tradition becomes an emissary of death, an emissary of bondage, that you can no longer move because your culture says this, and we have to take this, we have to swear this, then I think you have to, that culture, that tradition must go to the extent of life. You cannot bring death to supplement for life. You cannot start killing children for the sins of the fathers. You understand what I'm saying? I was even going through the Bible, and I was reading, and here I think it is Mark chapter 7. I think it is verse 8. It says, "For laying aside the commandment of God, you hold on to traditions of men." The issue here is that every tradition was made by man. There is no divine tradition. Every single tradition and culture was made by men. So it was a man like you that sat down and said this to become tradition. Just as you are in your family, you can start a tradition in your family that now children, when you grow and have your own children, this is our culture. Every 1st of January, we would meet, we would pray, we would all have dinner together. You start a culture, you start your own culture. So how is it that somebody who started their own a century ago, 3 centuries ago, still controlling your choices? Listen, ladies and gentlemen, traditions have no place in the Constitution. Your tradition cannot save you in the court of law. It cannot save you from the hands of men, and it cannot save you from the hands of God. So of what use is tradition and culture? They said, no, if you do this there, where I'm going to, where the lady said, if she does this, if she is with another man, they will fall sick. They have to. So from that same tribe, we have people who traveled abroad. The wife had left, and was with another man, and they were threatening, the children. Nothing happened to the children.
So that brings me to a thought in my head. which is, or a question I have, which is, do these things actually work?
You see,
but then we've heard stories. I mean, people have even called to say, yes, so it works.
It works.
They've seen it. But you see, what I think personally is, what you believe in will work for you.
That is where I'm going. What you subscribe to is what will work for you. If you subscribe to that tradition, it will work, and the people abroad, these things are not catching them there.
I wonder why.
It is not catching them there at all, because they are separating, they are divorcing, they are, if there is abuse, it takes them, they arrest them, and they separate, and the woman goes with another man, and nothing is happening. So now I'm wondering, is your tradition only potent within your area or the state or the federation? Because once you change continents, it's as if the thing cannot. But listen, tradition works on you only if you believe in it. Let me tell you something, for anything to happen, you have to agree. For God to use you, you have to agree. For the devil to use you, they need your permission. So your permission is the grounds for any app that you are going to download. They will ask, do you agree? They need your permission to operate. And that is a divine law. You cannot force someone to worship what they don't want to worship. They need your permission. So it only works if you subscribe to it. Let me quickly move away from that.
But I have an interesting story before you move.
Okay.
So a colleague on the station, Ada Blessing, she does the overnight show. She mentioned an issue. One of her listeners reached out to her with same thing, this tradition of culture. And I can't remember where this person was from, but the person she was in a relationship with, he hadn't gotten married. The culture where he was from was quite interesting. Something about where he's from. If an uncle or first of all, where he's from. Either before they marry or after they marry, the wife has to sleep with his brother first, or as some sort of, welcome package. I don't understand. That's number one. Number two, whenever they have male visitors, maybe from his side of the family, he would offer his wife as
Oh yes, I know that culture very well. We even traveled. I did it in sociology when I was in the university. You even reminded me of one. During the engagement ceremony, the wife has to sit on the laps of the oldest, whoever is the oldest male. Yes, and she has to show like a simulated sexual thing. She has to dance on his lap, he has to sit down. So you see those old men just touching and she's dancing. And this woman felt, after the engagement, she felt so that marriage lasted that day. Because the woman just felt violated. That how can
she violated?
She just said they told her that she would sit on the lap, but she didn't understand the sit on the lap. You have to sit on the lap. So you see all these kinds of, but the funny thing, Onyinchi, is that women are the one always suffering from tradition, because it always is to the advantage of man.
And sadly, women, like you said on the show before, enforce these traditions. Usually, the women will sit the incoming wife down.
You remember?
And it's really ridiculous, honestly speaking, because I mean, how can you love somebody and allow them to go through such in the name of what? Tradition, culture? It doesn't make sense. And this brings me to my next point, which is, how we have conversations about these are questions to ask, on the first date. What's your blood type, what blood group, genotype, etc. Blah blah blah. What are you doing? Please ask, what are the cultures in your place that you could practice? So ask. Honestly, that should be one of the first questions. What culture? Where are you from? What do you do? Do you subscribe? So that you know if you can do it or not. And you close that chapter and you move on.
Fantastic.
My
you know why it is difficult to fight for women? Because women are the enforcers of this tradition. They are the ones that will come and look at the widow that was beaten on last month. The husband died, and the wife of the older brother said she is the witch. Somebody who was already on the sick bed for how long? And then they gathered round, tied up at the leading of another woman, tied up a widow who had stayed with this man through this sickness. How many of you family came down to help?